Right, I'm going to make a start. Thanks, everybody. Croeso. Welcome to our State of the Nation 2022. Really grateful to everybody for joining us on the call today. I wanted to start by thanking all of those who are speaking today, and I will come to introducing the Minister shortly after I've made a few brief introductory remarks, but I also wanted to thank the team, to thank Natasha Davis, Hadi Turkman and Thomas for all their work on preparing this report today and everything around it. And hopefully you'll have seen it reported in the media today, and welcome you all to participate in discussion about the chat on social media as well. So I just wanted to start with a couple of introductory things really. Back in 2018, we published the first State of the Nation report, and it was really important to us as an organisation that we brought together key statistics and analysis that enable us to measure and monitor what progress we're making in Wales towards gender equality. And we know that this measurement and monitoring matters and really drives change. And we also know, as we'll hear today, that we do need to change. We've got to go further and faster towards equality. So 2022 marks 30 years since Chwarae Teg was established, and soon we'll hear from the Minister Jane Hutt, who, as the first director of Chwarae Teg when we started in 1992, knows better than anyone why we need actions to deliver gender equality. But this change won't happen on its own. It doesn't just happen organically or without action, but it does matter because we should live in a society where all women, men and non-binary people can enjoy the same rights, opportunities and crucially the same outcomes, but also because achieving equality really drives economic growth, better well-being in our nation, so that in future generations can benefit from the opportunities that we have to offer in Wales, regardless of our sex, our gender, our age, our disability, our religion, our ethnicity, our backgrounds, the community we come from, so that none of these things dictate our ability to achieve happiness or fulfilment and enable us to make the fullest contribution to Welsh society. And as I said, we'll hear this morning, we've got some way to go to achieve that ambition. And now really is the time to act. Too often, when crises hit, longer term thinking or really ambitious change can go out of the window and be seen as perhaps a distraction or a luxury. But as we've seen in the pandemic, inequality has actually grown and worsened. So it's not a luxury to look again at what radical action we need. It's absolutely a necessity. And we have to ask ourselves once again, are we doing enough, and are we brave enough to do things differently in Wales so that in another 30 years' time, we won't need to publish reports like these. And more importantly, people in Wales will be able to access all the opportunities we have to offer here, free from discrimination and harm. So we do have a shared commitment with our government to deliver the change. Our colleagues in other parts of the UK often tell us how they look on enviously at how in Wales we do have a government that's demonstrated its commitment and radical vision for a feminist government. So we have that vision, is set out in the Gender Equality Review and the recommendations which have been accepted by the Minister and her cabinet colleagues. And I know that Jane has a deep personal commitment to delivering on those ambitions. So I'm very, very pleased to welcome you, Minister, to join us this morning. I look forward to hearing from you now.
Diolch yn fawr, bore da I chi gyd. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much, Cerys, and so, thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. I kind of recall speaking at State of the Nation events. I particularly recall the one at Butetown Community Centre, which was so important that we were at the heart of, you know, what we want to try and achieve together to tackle inequality and get fair play for women. And it's just great to see the State of the Nation report, because it really is one of the most critical and crucial tools for Welsh policy making. That's not just for me as Minister for Social Justice, it's for all the Welsh Government. And I'm very pleased to be involved in events to mark its launch this year, coinciding with the Chwarae Teg 30th year of operations. And I was honoured to be appointed as director a newly formed Chwaraeg back in 1992. And back then we outlined that mission to expand the role of women in the Welsh economy. So over the past 30 years, you've realised that vision. Chwaraeg has ensured that more women in Wales have entered the workplace, developed their skills, built rewarding careers, but most importantly, influenced policy at every level and in every sector of Welsh society. So this year's State of the Nation report highlights some promising progress in relation to employment, leadership and representation. But despite these pockets of progress, the report also shows there's much still to do. And as we know, as Cerys, you've said, the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic has set us back in many respects, and women in particular have shouldered the burden of the response. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated and exacerbated the deep inequalities in our society, affecting people from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic backgrounds, young people, older workers, disabled people, those with health conditions, as well as those in low-paid occupations. So it's been stark to see those inequalities exacerbated and coming forward. And as we continue to tackle the crisis, and as we hope move into a time of recovery, it's crucial that we seek to end these systemic inequalities. So the Advancing Gender Equality in Wales plan, the preceding review completed by Chwaraeg, and the suite of other equality-focused plans now in place, provides us with that framework and focus through which to address the changing landscape for women in Wales. And I'm pleased that our programme for government prioritises implementation of key aspects of these plans. I'm also optimistic that our plans are well placed to provide solutions to some of the more worrying findings of the State of the Nation report. I'm sure we'll have more detailed discussion on these later in the events, but I was particularly struck by the findings on the gender pay gap, the impact of childcare responsibilities, strengthening diversity at all levels of leadership, also achieving intersectional equality data and reducing the risk women face of violence and abuse. And these findings are troubling, but they build on information we already know, on information also that the Welsh Government has begun to act on. We're committed to fund childcare for more parents in education and training and those on the edge of work. The childcare offer does give parents, in particular women, more choice and a greater ability to have both a family and a career. But increasing support for childcare costs for parents in education and training does reflect the value placed on supporting those seeking to improve their employment prospects by gaining qualifications or changing career plans. So in December, I laid the first of a set of national milestones and indicators in the Senedd. And in doing so, I have committed to work in social partnership with public sector bodies to eliminate the pay gap for gender, race and ethnicity by 2050. Well, we want to get there before then, of course. Eliminating the pay gap is a vital step towards a society that enables people to fulfil their potential, no matter their gender, background or circumstances. And addressing pay inequality is a key element in our vision of a Wales of fair work, and the recognition that equality, diversity and inclusion at work is integral to our broader commitment to fair work for all workers in Wales. So setting this ambition as a national milestone which we must progress towards provides consistency in our approach and complements the aspirations set out in that range of fair work and equality strategies and action plans. I know you're all very pleased to hear that we're now having an equality evidence unit implemented within Welsh Government from this year, alongside a race disparity evidence unit and a disability disparity unit. And the equality evidence unit will offer a targeted resource to suggest improvements to evidence on both sex and gender. And collectively, these three teams will be seeking to improve quantitative and qualitative data on seldom heard and disadvantaged and underserved groups, as well as considering evidence from an intersectional perspective and bringing in that lived experience that we know is so important to inform and guide us in our policy making. The Welsh Government has always been clear about our ambition to end violence against women and girls, building on our groundbreaking Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act. But violence against women and girls is a societal problem which requires a societal response, and we must challenge attitudes and change behaviours of those who behave abusively. It is not for women to modify their behaviour, it's for the abusers to change theirs. And that's why our programme for government commits to strengthening the violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy, to include a focus on violence against women in the street, the workplace, as well as the home, in order to make Wales the safest place in Europe to be a woman. And that's something where I really want for us together to strive to achieve that, because it is so important and fundamental to chwarae teg, fair play for women in Wales. In Wales, successive governments have made strong commitments to equality, and for this Senedd term, social justice is at the core of our mission. So my recent draft budget demonstrates investment with a social justice focus, and I've outlined policy ambitions that are radical and could drive substantial change, including the Universal Basic Income pilot. However, as this year's report makes clear, no single actor, no single policy, no single idea will address the root causes of equality. And there must be collective responsibility in how we rethink our society, how we want to live following this crisis, and how we prioritise the creation of broader opportunity and equality of outcome. And I welcome chwarae teg's commitment to tackle critical issues of unpaid work and care, and harassment, abuse and violence over the coming year. The Welsh Government has important strands of work underway in these areas and across the wider equalities landscape. And it's crucial that we all stand together, ready to work in partnership to turn the dial and make real, meaningful and swift progress to achieve the change we all want to see. And I will finish by saying, of course, that we're very much all now involved in addressing the cost of living crisis, which is going to affect women so profoundly. And, it is social justice at the core of what we are all doing together. And I'm so proud of being helping to start chwarae teg off on its journey, and to thank you for the work you've done, the evidence you provide, and also to holding us to account to ensure that we can all deliver fair play chwarae teg for women in Wales. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks very much for that really comprehensive introduction to our session this morning. And we look forward to, in the spirit of collective responsibilities, continuing to work together to deliver the changes that we all agree we want to see. So I know that you've got a busy calendar today and you won't be able to stay with us for the remainder of the session, but I know we'll work with your officials and yourself to continue to address the concerns that are outlined in them, as well as mark the positive action. And I'm going to pass on to do the hard work this morning to my colleagues. Natasha's going to start by taking us through some of the findings of the report. And then we will have an opportunity for people to interrogate some of that data and ask questions and perhaps pick up on some of the things that have been said already. And I hope that that's a long enough segue, Tash, for you to be able to take over.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm pleased to be sharing the findings, some of the findings from our State of the Nation report with you all this morning. I'm just going to take you through a few key figures around each of the key areas that our report is organised around. We collect data in relation to women in the economy, women's representation, and women's risk of poverty, of financial hardship, isolation, and of violence. Make a start with a point about intersectionality, which the Minister obviously made reference to as well. We are very clear that we will not achieve gender equality until all women in Wales are able to enjoy fair and equitable outcomes and are able to live their lives free from discrimination and oppression. It is only by looking at the issues through an intersectional lens that we can really identify the problems and, more importantly, the solutions. Now, there are undoubtedly still some data challenges in relation to looking at things through an intersectional lens, made harder in part by the fact that sample sizes in Wales are a bit smaller. That's something that we'll be exploring in a bit more detail as part of our session on equality evidence tomorrow. But looking at some headline economic figures for disabled people and ethnic minority people, we see that there is even greater inequality faced by these groups. Disabled women are much less likely to be employed or engaged in formal economic activity. Economic inactivity amongst disabled women currently stands at 46.9%, which is up around 1% on last year's figures. The unemployment rate amongst disabled women stands at 7.3%, which again is up by about 1% from last year. In terms of ethnic minority women, they remain economically inactive at a higher rate than white women. 40.2% of women from an ethnic minority are economically inactive, compared to 26.9% of white women. 6.7% of women from an ethnic minority are unemployed, compared to 3.8% of white women. The unemployment rate of women from an ethnic minority has increased by 2.4% between 2020 and 2021, compared to an increase of just 0.4% amongst white women. And now the unemployment rates amongst women from an ethnic minority are higher than before and during the pandemic, although they are lower than in 2018. So this is something that obviously we're going to have to see a greater focus on from organisations like ourselves, but from government as well. We are yet to achieve gender equality in the economy. Women still experience barriers that men do not, and our economic systems, structures and policies continue to recreate and reproduce inequality. This inequality in the economy stems from the different roles, sectors, occupations and contract types that women are more likely to be employed in, which in turn is shaped by the greater pressure that women often face due to caring responsibilities and unpaid work. The gender pay gap is often used as a top-line indicator of equality in the workplace, as it demonstrates the impact that inequality in the labour market has on average incomes. This year, we've seen the gender pay gap in Wales increase from 11.8% to 12.3%, and this is due primarily to a larger increase in men's hourly pay over the last year. Across Wales, we see that the gender pay gap varies quite a lot, from a high of 25% in Torfaen to a low of 1.9% in Conwy. Now, with a small sample size, data on the gender pay gap in Wales is quite volatile, but I think what we can confidently say about the data from the data is that progress towards closing that income gap is neither consistent nor rapid. Overall, the rate of economic inactivity amongst women remains higher than that of men. The one exception being for women between the ages of 16 to 24, where the economic activity rate is actually slightly higher than men in the same age bracket. When we look at the reasons for economic inactivity, we see that women are still around 4 times more likely than men to cite looking after the family or home as the reason for being economically inactive. Now, economic inactivity is a slightly flawed measure. It doesn't take account of the value of the unpaid work that women are doing, unpaid work that helps our economy and our society to keep moving. But what this data does do is highlight again the impact that caring responsibilities is still having on women's ability to engage with the formal paid economy. When we look at self-employment, we see that women are still less likely to be self-employed than men, and there has been a slight drop in the proportion of women who are self-employed compared to last year. And in terms of working patterns, we see that women are still much more likely to be working part-time than men, but we have seen a drop of around 3% in the proportion of women who are working part-time this year. Now, this could be a good news story. There's a couple of caveats. If this is the result of agile and inclusive ways of working, opening up new employment opportunities for women, reducing the need for women to take on lower paid part-time work, and if it is the beginning of a positive trend and not just a blip this year, this shift could help to close the gender pay gap, as we know that the part-time pay penalty is quite a significant factor in that pay gap. So we will be looking at these figures very closely over the next year, and trying to determine come our next State of the Nation report whether or not this is the beginning of a positive longer-term shift. In terms of women's representation, now we know that representation matters. If we've got diverse voices in the room, different issues and different perspectives are going to be discussed. And this diversity of voice is critically important in public life, where decisions are being made that affect every aspect of our day-to-day lives. Following the Senedd elections in May in 2021, 43% of our members of the Senedd are women. Now, while this is a slight drop from where we ended the last Senedd term, it is broadly in line with the figures that immediately followed the 2016 election. We also saw in 2021 the first woman of colour elected to the Senedd, something that was long overdue. Now, while the Senedd is not quite gender balanced, it's still we still see a much higher proportion of women represented there than at other levels of politics in Wales. 29% of our councillors are women. We obviously haven't seen much change in that since we've been publishing State of the Nation, as we've been between elections. But we will be keeping a very close eye on the elections in May to see whether commitments to diversify local representatives is translating into more women being elected. And hopefully, if they are, that will translate into a greater proportion of women amongst local government cabinets and among our council leaders. Looking at women's representation in senior positions in the workforce, we see that women are still less likely to be managers, directors, and senior officials. This is holding very stubbornly at around 39%. We also see that women are less likely to be leading businesses. Just 14% of SMEs in Wales are wholly led by women. And turning to women at risk, and I think it's this section of the report where we see the most stark figures. Women remain at far greater risk of violence, and despite additional funding during the pandemic to specialist services, they remain under pressure. And across the UK, we see unacceptably low conviction rates for sexual assault and rape. The issue of violence against women was brought sharply and tragically into focus in 2020, with the widely reported murders of Wen Jinglin, Sarah Everard, and Sabina Messer, and more recently, the murder of Ashley Murphy. These high-profile cases shine light on the endemic and unacceptable misogyny and violence that women continue to face, an issue that affects every aspect of our lives, shaping decisions about what we wear, where we go, and how we get there. Across the UK, 71% of women report having experienced sexual harassment in public places. 45% did not report these incidents as they did not think that reporting it would make any difference. Only 28% of women in Wales feel safe walking alone at night, and just 23% feel safe on public transport after dark. Pressure on specialist services is growing, with a 22% increase in the number of survivors who could not be supported by refuge due to the lack of capacity or resources. Women are also at greater risk of poverty, as well as experiencing different risks and impacts of poverty. Over the past year, in the data, we've seen that poverty rates have increased. Single parents, the majority of whom are women, still remain the most likely to be living in poverty. 46% of single parent households in Wales are living in relative income poverty, compared to a rate of 23% overall. And connected to the issue of poverty and financial hardship is our social security system, a system that is supposed to offer a safety net for those who are unable to work, those with long-term health conditions, and those whose income does not provide enough to live on. During the first year of the pandemic, we saw quite significant investment in schemes that were aimed to support those who were unable to work due to lockdowns. We had the furlough scheme, self-employment income support scheme. Now, while these were certainly not without flaws, they offered vital financial support to many people. Our day-to-day social security system does not benefit from the same kind of investment. Universal credit remains an issue, particularly from a gender equality perspective. Now, this past year, while we've seen the overall number of people claiming universal credit flattening, as we would expect given fewer sectors remained closed, we see that women still make up the majority of universal credit claimants in Wales, and notably, they are more likely to be claiming universal credit and being in work, a further indication of the financial pressures that are created by low pay and part-time work among women, and something that leaves women more likely to be affected by additional requirements or sanctions that might be brought in that require people to change jobs, increase their hours in order to increase their income levels. So that's just a few of the sort of key stats from the State of the Nation. I think the overall picture we see is that we're not making progress quickly enough. We therefore need renewed focus and energy on the measures that will tackle the root causes of this inequality. I'm going to hand back to Cerys to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Tash. Thanks, Tash. Can you hear me? I can still see you, so I wasn't sure whether. Oh, there we go. Fab. So, as Tash has given a really comprehensive overview of the findings so far, a question that we all want to ask is how we can solve those issues. And our manifesto for Gender Equal Wales outlines the measures that we think are needed across a range of areas, from economic development, social care, childcare, which we know is crucial, education, tackling poverty, and eradicating sexual harassment. And as we always say amongst ourselves in Chwaraeteg, this manifesto is not just for the election, it's actually a really comprehensive programme of actions that we need to take across the board. So I'm just going to conclude some of the key messages from our State of the Nation report this year. We know there's still more to do to secure the green, caring and equitable Wales that we want to see and that we all need. The pace of change, as Tash said, is far too slow, and against too many of the equality indicators, we see little or no progress being made. So we need to see much greater renewed focus on tackling the root causes of gender inequality. This year, rather depressingly, we saw the gender pay gap increase slightly to 12.3%, and progress towards closing that gap is again too slow. The latest figures being a further reminder that that progress is neither consistent or guaranteed, and we've seen the variation across different parts of Wales as well. And just while action is needed in many areas, just to pick out a couple of key critical issues for tackling gender inequality in Wales. Firstly, childcare and unpaid work, and secondly, sexual harassment, abuse and violence. On childcare, as you've seen, women remain 4 times more likely to cite looking after a family or home as the reason for not engaging in formal paid economy. And we see larger gender gaps emerge in terms of pay, employment and average hours for older women who are more likely to also have care responsibilities. In terms of sexual harassment, 71% of women in the UK have experienced sexual harassment in public places. I think that figure is probably higher. And just 28% of women in Wales feel safe walking alone after dark. 45% of women didn't report sexual harassment incidents as they didn't think it would help. And we've seen recent reports from Estyn about the scale of harassment within our schools, and pretty endemic in terms of what young women particularly are experiencing. So we know that no single actor or action, as the Minister said, will be able to address the root causes of these issues, but government will need to consider how and where it invests money and how public policy can be more effective in driving change. We think the Gender Equality Review sets out a clear pathway for doing this, but we need to see much quicker commitment to implementing the recommendations within that report. So thinking about what else we need to address, not just putting all of our emphasis on government, there's also work to be done by employers, and businesses will need to consider how they can better organise work to support those with care and responsibilities, and think about what policies and practice are needed to eradicate workplace harassment. All of us in civil society will need to consider how we can work better together in what is going to continue to be a challenging funding and political environment to support marginalised groups and campaign for faster change. We know, and we've heard this morning, that in Wales there undoubtedly is a strong political commitment to equality and social justice. But when we see little change against these key measures for gender equality, the challenge for all of us remains: what more can we do, and how much more quickly, in a more radical way, can we turn those warm words into firm action? So that's a really broad overview of where we are in our State of the Nation today in 2022. We're going to invite, and I can see there's some questions already in the chat. I want to invite my colleague Hardy Turkman to join us as well. Hardy is our research partner and absolutely instrumental in bringing together this report. Hardy, thanks for all your hard work on this. And I'm sure you'll be able to answer all the hard questions.
Thank you.
Tash, I think you're going to help us moderate here.
Yes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm opening my various little boxes and pop-ups. I'll start with a more general one. We've had a couple of sort of more focused ones coming through in the chat. And just a reminder to anybody that please do pop any other questions you've got as we go through in the Q&A box, and I'll put them to the rest of the team. But I suppose a sort of more general question really is that obviously we're seeing not the kind of progress that we want to see. We've touched on what needs to happen. I suppose, yeah, is there anything else that you guys would like to reflect on in terms of, I suppose, how you felt when you saw the figures produced this year? Because I know that they had quite an impact on me when we were putting the report together.
Yeah, I'm sure Hardy will have things to add here as well. It is pretty sobering, but that's the point of the report. When we back in 2018 decided that it was time to have a report of this nature, it was to focus the mind, and it was to give us the evidence that we felt was lacking to really challenge whether progress was being made, and to help us hone down on, well, where is action needed, and in that sort of challenging context that I was referencing at the end, how do we make those tough calls about where we put our money and our time and effort when we don't have endless funds and so on. I think the thing that always, I was going to say winds me up, but gets me going, if you like, is that it worries me that this is still a bit of a nice to have sometimes, and that we don't see addressing inequality in all its forms. And obviously we're focused particularly on gender here today, but we don't see that as absolutely integral to the type of society that we want, and absolutely crucial to delivering on better outcomes for everybody. And too often it's sort of siphoned off into somebody's responsibility over there, and not something that is absolutely embedded in everything that we all do all of the time. Hardy, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, this report is quite important, and every year we actually, says that we don't progress. But one of the important things about this report is that we are comparing the figures from the previous year, and you might not see the changes that much. Next year, we're going to do a 5-year overview of these figures, and it's going to be really interesting to see how much we progressed in 5 years. Now, you might see the figures, dropping or increasing a little margins and so on. But actually, the report shows that there is a structural inequality. That's the root cause of it, and then how we're going to deal with this structural equality. And these are numbers, these are statistics, these are graphs, but actually this is also people's lives. So the important things about this report is that gender, even though it seems like numbers, it's not abstract. It's people's life, and these numbers are coming from experiences. So yeah, we know that there are data gaps. We know that we can't show everything, every structural inequality in this report, or follow up the the progress, or monitor the progress in numbers, but we need to look at the experiences of people to understand this, rather than just looking to the numbers. So I think, as Cerys, you said that, intersectionality is so much important to discuss these issues. The structural inequalities are critical to discuss these issues, and without acknowledging these factors, we can't actually make progress, I think, overall.
A couple of questions on similar themes, so we'll try and group them together. So a couple of questions about the varying gender pay gap rates across the different local authority areas. One question about any ideas why Monmouthshire has had such a big increase. And then another question about what do we think accounts for those huge differences across local authority areas? Do we think there's likely to be a correlation with the lack of affordable childcare provision, poverty rates, disability levels in those areas? Yeah, so maybe one for Hadi to start with.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I'll say something quite general, and then Hadi can be more specific in her analysis. We know that the gender pay gap is not a perfect measure. I think everybody's very clear about that. It gives an overall indicator, but doesn't tell us the full picture. I mean, one thing that's always struck us about it is that there could be huge variations at a local level in men's pay that have an impact on the gender pay gap. So, for example, when Ford in Bridgend closed, for lots of men employed in quite high paid roles in that area has an impact on the gender pay gap across the whole of that local authority. So it is important to measure the gender pay gap, but it's not the be all and end all. It sort of starts to tell a story. And I think what's important when we look at across local authorities is working with the key employers, the local authority itself, in understanding what is going on there, and whether there's action that can be taken. But Hadi, I don't know if you want to come in and say anything about changes this year.
Yeah, in this report, you see the local authorities' figures for gender pay gap. But as Cerys said, that this is not the best way to present the gender pay gap, because we can't show the reasons of this. So basically, gender pay gap is the proportion of women's wages compared to men. So we are looking to the whole economy in a local area, rather than looking to the sector-based data, and then how people are actually working and so on. So it's a volatile figure. I mean, we need to look at the local authorities separately, and then understand the economic structure in these local authorities, because for example, historically, Anglesey is the gender pay gap is Anglesey is quite high, because the industry there is more male dominated. But in other parts of Wales, maybe the industry is based on more kind of for example, care sector, where women are more dominated. So the proportion of the wages is just differs according to these factors. The indicators are changing. So if we look at the year-to-year comparison in the local authorities, we can also think about how many women enter the job market, how many women go out of the job market, or part-time work and then full-time work, and how much these earnings contribute to the women in general, and so on. So there are loads of different indicators, and of course this year COVID is still very important factor shaping the job market as well. How the job market and the labor market is shaped according to COVID is another indicator. So these are all factors that we need to account when we are looking to the local areas. I mean, there's a question about Monmouthshire. I can't answer because I don't know the exact figures of the industrial landscape of Monmouthshire in front of me, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, gender, there are more detailed analysis of gender pay gap in the academic literature as well. So, but we are trying to show here that it's really very volatile, the gender pay gap, but it's still there. It's still there. Women and men are not equitably sharing the labor resources. That's what we are trying to show.
Group another couple of questions together. So a question about how much of a role does the private sector have in making changes to level the playing field, and what would be the top 2 actions that you would recommend employers could take this year based on the research?
I'll take that one. Yeah, I think the private sector's got a massive role to play as an employer of a huge number of men and women across Wales. I think two that I would pick out is collect the data about your own organisation. What are men and women doing? What roles they're doing? How much they're being paid? Are you able to be to have a really clear understanding of what the differences are in your organisation based on gender, as well as a range of other measures, and then interrogate that data. What can you do about it? What kind of policies should you have in place to ensure that you can reduce that inequality? And the second thing, we know that unequal sharing of care and responsibilities is the major driver in what Hardy's just been talking about, gender pay difference, and the difference in the choices that women and men make about the types of careers that they can have and how they're able to work, whether that's full-time, part-time, and so on. So I think looking at what policies you have in place to support both women and men in sharing that caring responsibility more equally, and what culture you have in your workplace to enable a greater confidence, particularly in men, in being able to ask for flexibility to be able to support their families, whether that's caring for elderly relatives or caring for young children. So I think, yeah, collecting the data, interrogating it, and the policies and culture around caring, I think, are the 2 I would pick out. I don't know whether Hardy will agree.
Yeah, totally agree. I think we need to put the equality at heart of everything. So businesses, private sector has loads to do in this. So yeah, we know that there are structural problems, but we are embedded to, all of us embedded to these structural problems, and we need to do something to overcome these things. And there are always, more progressive actions that we can take. Quota Take works for this reason. We are trying to encourage these positive actions in the businesses and in the government level and at every level. So even individuals' lives, because as women also we don't have confidence to do many things, for example. So what we are doing is trying to encourage this positive and progressive action to overcome this structural inequality. So yeah, I agree everything Cerys said here, and I think there are loads of advice, guidance, and mentoring and other kind of opportunities out there to businesses and other organizations can take up to achieve gender equality.
I'm going to direct 2 different questions at you now. So Cerys, this question about education and what's being done to look at how education can be teaching children from a young age to challenge inequality. And Hardy, there's a question specifically on data, which I'll direct to you. I believe that some data collection paused because of COVID. Is data now being collected again? And have we had any problems finding any of the data this year? So yeah, so Cerys, you go first, and then Hardy, please.
Yeah, well, there's a huge amount we need to do in education. We know that from a very young age, even preschool, girls and boys' experience of reading, of interacting with different toys, of the clothes that they wear, has a huge influence on the gender stereotypes that become absolutely ingrained. And we see attrition in different subject areas by gender throughout education. So the subjects that girls and boys choose at GCSE, at A-level, undergraduate and postgraduate is gendered. And there are multiple and many reasons for that, including the numbers of role models they see in those industries, who's teaching those subjects, how we're teaching those subjects, whether we're only teaching about white male scientists, for example, or mathematicians, or the history that we're choosing in our curriculum. And there should be an opportunity within the new curriculum for Wales for much, for us to address a lot of that, but we have a lot of work to do to give our teachers and our educators the tools, the skills, the confidence to be able to do that in a different way. And we're some way from that. And there are some, I've happened to glance an eye over the chat, and there was a question particularly about STEM as well. We can see that in some STEM subjects, we're not just not going forward, we're going backwards. So if you look at the numbers of young women compared to young men taking computer science type subjects, actually that's getting worse. And given the importance of those kind of industries to the future of our economy, we should be putting massive effort into addressing that, because I think it goes back to what I was saying right at the start. We can't just expect this to happen organically. We have to intervene. This is why the data is so important, because it can help us identify the areas where we need to intervene, and education is certainly one of them.
So going back to the data collection, we are looking to the ONS data, which are based on annual population survey data, which are based on estimations. So these estimates are not collected in person, like that there is not research done every year, but there are estimates coming from different different administrative data. So in that sense, I don't think that COVID that much affected the data collection, but there are different areas. Like, for example, VMUNET risk section is completely derived from a different data sets. Not even one data set, because we don't have disaggregated data for Wales in the crime stuff, gender disaggregated and Welsh disaggregated data, for example. This is a big problem for us to understand the condition at the VMUNET risk section. But we collect data from organizations doing these services, so they have registries and so on. So I don't know how much this is affected from the COVID perspective, but of course, COVID probably caused some problems in data collection, but we are trying to follow official statistics that are published every year. So I'm not fully aware of if any COVID limitations affected this year's statistics in that sense. But yeah, I'm sure that there are some limitations that COVID also presented in the information sector as such.
Just to add one thing to that, and Harley is absolutely right, we deliberately chose the data sets that we have so that we could monitor these on an annual basis. But in the gender equality review, we talked about the importance of addressing the weaknesses in data collection in Wales, because we suffer from small sample sizes of national data sets. When you cut that by Wales, and then you cut it by local authority, and then you cut it by gender, and then you cut it by ethnicity and so on, you're talking very small numbers. So that's why we recommended in the gender equality review, you need to also look at people's lived experience. You also need to embed academic research into policy making. We can't just take one single measure. And I think, we're really pleased to see the progress on the new equalities evidence units. That's something that we've called for, and I think is absolutely going to be essential, because there is only so much that organisations in the third sector, including ourselves, can do. We've got to embed this mainstreaming of understanding equalities data into government, into the way that different organisations operate and think and how they make changes based on that evidence. And at the moment, it's too few voices shouting from the sidelines, and it's not integrated enough into the everyday work of most organisations.
Yeah, on which note, we are talking about the importance of equality data tomorrow as well, with the participation of Chief Statisticians of Wales, Stephanie Howard, and another colleague of ours from the Welsh Women's Budget Group, sorry. And we're going to talk about the importance of equality data and what kind of progress we need to take up in Wales.
We are running short on time, so I'm going to put one last question, I think mainly for you, Cerys, actually, about sort of, obviously our State of the Nation report covers a huge range of issues. So how are we as an organisation, how we're going to work in collaboration with other community organisations focused on other marginalised groups who experience inequality, how we're going to try and work collaboratively to tackle these quite deep-rooted issues?
That's a really good question. I mean, we chose to group the State of the Nation's report into these three areas of women in the economy, women represented, and women at risk, because we know that all of those things have an impact on women's experiences in Wales, of the outcomes that we're able to achieve and how we feel in our everyday lives. And we've aligned the data and analysis under those three themes. But as both the Minister and I said at the outset, no one silver bullet to fix gender inequality in the same way as there would be to address any inequality. If there was, we would have done it by now and we'd all be skipping off happily into the sunset. So it's about multi-intervention at strategic level from government, in organisations, in our everyday lives, calling out those behaviours, those microaggressions that we see, all taking responsibility for educating, for talking about inequality and the things that we need to address it. And, you know, I'm a huge believer that the more of us can align behind that, working together, the more powerful our voice is, because we don't want to be those sort of marginalized group shouting, as I said, from the sidelines. We want to be saying, you know, actually this is something that we all need to commit to. There is a shared vision around the type of society that we want to live in, the type of Wales we want to see, the what we should expect for our children and grandchildren. And we certainly can't do that alone as one organisation, nor can anybody else. So only by working together collaboratively and really embedding the best of what we all know. You know, we've got 30 years of working in gender inequality. Other organisations have much greater expertise in working across a range of other protected characteristics. And I think it's about working together where we have shared ambition that will really achieve the biggest progress. Tash, are we about on time? I'm sure.
So yeah, we've just got about 5 minutes to wrap up. So I'll leave that for you.
Thanks everyone. And I'm sure we haven't got to answer all the questions. I look forward to catching up the chat and everything afterwards. But I just wanted to thank everybody for your time this morning and for coming. Thanks to my colleagues once again for all their hard work on producing this report. I do think it's something that is really important and we need to continue to do in Wales. I just want to give a quick plug. Hardy did a great job of doing that just now. There's some further events that we've got later this week around State of the Nation. So on Tuesday, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we've got a session particularly on equality evidence with Emily Bell from the UK Women's Budget Group and Steph Howarth, the Chief Statistician at Welsh Government. And then later in the week on Thursday, we'll be having a discussion with Julie James, the Climate Change Minister, about a feminist green agenda for Wales. So when I talked about computer science before, we can also relate that to the environmental issues, probably the biggest thing that's going to affect all of our lives for the next several generations. How can we ensure that all of our actions towards addressing climate change also take into account the way that climate change is experienced in unequally, and also that the opportunities that come out of addressing climate change through green tech, through the types of emerging industries that we're going to need, that those opportunities are equally available for men and women. And then just keep an eye on our social media. We'll be hosting a Twitter chat on Friday at 1:30 with people from around the UK, and we encourage those of you who can join us to follow Chwarae Teg on Twitter and hashtag SOTN. And then just be really grateful for you to share your thoughts and engage with us. And in that spirit, the last question was asked about how we can collaborate together to hopefully in next year's report be able to demonstrate we've made some significant change towards gender equality in Wales. So thanks everybody and have a good week.